We're still in a pandemic, and people are dying. And I got sick, and my grandma died, and I lost my job, and I started hating my kids, and I ran out of toilet paper, and I never see my friends, and I can't hug my mom, and the hospitals were at capacity, and this has all gone on for months. Deep breath. So that was the opening line of an article in the Seattle Times in March of this year. And if you go looking, a quick Google search will present you with hundreds of articles, essays, pop psychology, and academic analysis of how the pandemic of the past 16 months has caused all manner of stress, anxiety, depression, even trauma to both individuals and whole communities. The title of that article I quoted a moment ago is "Hope is Ahead, but we haven't hit the post in post-traumatic stress from COVID-19. And I think that's true. No one I know has been unaffected. Seems like just yesterday, we were bemoaning what a cruddy year 2020 was. Remember 2020? Not just the pandemic. Last year, we watched George Floyd unjustifiably murdered. We had riots across the country protesting that and other police violence. We watched the rise of QAnon, gross mismanagement and lies from the former administration, an awful election season, and the realization that 70 million American voters wanted that administration to keep the keys to the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet. On and on. There were massive fires in Australia and the American West, including here in Colorado. There were refugees drowning in the Mediterranean and languishing in camps across North Africa and Southern Europe. Migrant children being taken from their parents and kept in cages right here in the United States. Remember when you couldn't find toilet paper? And that last one is undeniably flippant. But it also makes the point that the past 16 months have been just flat out emotionally and spiritually confusing. What were we supposed to be doing? How are we supposed to react? Millions of us were largely stuck at home while it felt like the world was collapsing around us. And it wasn't, not really, but it certainly felt that way. Feelings of grief, anxiety, loneliness, helplessness, even hopelessness have rippled through every person I know, including me. Especially like last winter before we had a vaccine, when Zoom was becoming a four-letter word, when a mob of white men briefly took over the United States Congress, and when springtime and sunshine felt impossibly far away. Every person I know who lives alone experienced painful isolation. Every parent I know went through hell with their children and online learning. Every student I know felt like they lost an entire year of their education. Travel plans were canceled. Businesses evaporated. Extended families couldn't see each other. Frontline healthcare workers felt like they were in a war zone. I want you to know, whatever you've been feeling or pushing away or struggling to articulate, whatever it is that's been weighing on your heart, whatever fear, worry, stress, anxiety, grief, bewilderment, anger, depression, whatever you've been feeling or struggling with, you are not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You've been through a lot. You are not alone. We see you. We feel you. We are with you. Back in March of 2020, when we first had to close this church, I was mostly annoyed at the break in momentum. I felt like First Unitarian was in a pretty good place right then. I felt like the groundwork we had done together around covenant and white supremacy culture and anti-racism work had been effective, and we were moving purposefully toward having some of the deeper, difficult conversations that we will need to have to become not a church that just talks about racism, but an actively anti-racist church in our policies, in our worship, in our social gatherings, in our very culture. I felt like the pandemic was a nuisance, and we would endure for a few weeks or a month, and then we'd pick up where we left off. And I remember my own reluctance at this new online model. I didn't want to learn how to preach to a camera instead of to your precious faces. I didn't want to be proficient in cameras and microphones, teleprompters, and the technology of online streaming. Like everyone else, I had no idea what we were in for. As the months dragged on and reality sunk in, I felt pretty helpless. I told a few people at the time it felt like I was working just as hard to accomplish half as much at things for which I had no skill. That's how it felt. During the riots and marches last summer, I desperately wanted to participate, if for no other reason than to try and convince violent white protesters to follow the lead of more peaceful black protesters. But I couldn't risk bringing COVID home to my family. Like many of you, during that time I spent way too much time following news of the election, the madness of QAnon, puzzling over the motivations of Trump voters. I wrote an essay about that. I spent way too much time on social media and moping around the house, which I began to get just thoroughly sick of. There were weeks on end where, except for the grocery store and walking the dogs, there really wasn't any place to go. And all of that punctuated by hours on Zoom calls, Zoom meetings, Zoom classes. I would tell my spouse some morning that I would be doomed to Zoom for 5 hours that day. I think I've become a bit of a closet Zoom curmudgeon. Well, I guess that's out of the closet now. I missed my church. And I missed my people, especially. I missed seeing some of our elders every week, people like Rose Tanaka, Mary Ann Thompson, Lewis Thompson, Ellen Cahill, Beth Neva, George and Sue Mitchell, many, many others. I felt inadequate and guilty that I couldn't go visit them, even when they needed me, and some of them did. I've shared before that I've struggled with depression for decades now, and like many people, I got pretty depressed this last winter. I increased the medication that I take, and it helped a little. And I'm sharing all this because there's a lot of psychologists and therapists out there who think that the whole culture, like thousands of disparate communities, hundreds of millions of individuals, have a lot of healing to do. And as far as I can tell, every one of those therapists and psychologists says that to do that, we have to be honest about what we've been through, what we've lost or had to let go of, what it's cost us, and what we've learned. As a community here at First Unitarian Denver, as we move back towards in-person gatherings, in-person meetings, in-person Sunday services, we just have to look at this as an opportunity, not just for healing and acknowledgement of what we've been through, but healing and acknowledgement of what we've been through together. There's an opportunity here to lighten each other's loads, as it were, and to grow closer by sharing our stories, listening to others, holding each other in belonging and covenant. One of the things I've learned is that there's no trajectory or plan or roadmap for how a whole community recovers from what we as a community have experienced simultaneously, but separately. Another thing I did not know before I sat down to research and write this sermon is that community healing, that phrase, is used by a number of nonprofits and activist communities for empowering and changing the narrative of Black people globally, people who have lived globally for generations under various systems of racialized white supremacy. Community healing is blessed, sacred, essential work. And here's the message for today. There's no going back to just the way things were. Not for the world, not for First Unitarian Denver. The future of First Unitarian Denver, like the future of every faith community everywhere, is one of multi-platform ministry. Kind of a weird word, but that's what it's being called out there. That is, using the tools of social media and online streaming, asynchronous programming, and yes, even Zoom, for staying connected and fulfilling our religious mission. Online worship on Sunday mornings has allowed us to reach people we've never reached before. Every Sunday, we have people tuning in from Chicago and Florida, Vermont, Wyoming, California, and more. Younger generations and families get their information and their spiritual resources in different ways than most of us listening right now even approve of. That's okay. It's an opportunity for all of us to grow. Here's what I'm thinking as I consider the immediate future of First Unitarian, and when I say that, I'm thinking like the next couple of years. And I found this model on a website from the See Hearts Collaborative, and I plan to adopt it for prioritizing my own ministry. The model has 3 pillars, though no relation to the Trinity that I know of. First is a focus on justice. Justice is a moral ideal and a guiding principle. In our case, that means becoming actively anti-racist as a community, becoming more involved, knowledgeable, and effective on climate change and climate justice, acting to protect the vulnerable in our world. Second, the second pillar, the spiritual practices of storytelling and resistance. And third, expanding the assumptions of we and our. That is, what and who do we mean when we say we? We practice, we believe, we covenant. Who is included or excluded when we say our, as in our community, our values, our congregation, our ministry? Now, you don't need to remember those 3 points, though I will repeat them. I'm sharing them with you to be transparent and honest with you about my own thinking and how I envision prioritizing my own ministry in this congregation, in this brave new world that we find ourselves in. Justice as a guiding principle, storytelling as an act of healing and resistance, expanding who and what we mean when we say we. This is blessed, sacred, essential work. It is how we will heal, and it is how we will move forward together. Amen.